Okay, imagine this for a second. It's March 1978. You're a dictator. You have just gambled your entire nation's future, its military, its economy, your own political life, on a massive invasion of your neighbor. And you lost.
And not just, a narrow loss, a catastrophic, unambiguous defeat.
Exactly. So the usual question is, how do you retreat? But the question we're asking today, looking at this specific stack of documents, is much, much darker. How do you survive the morning after?
That is the terrifying reality for Siad Barre, the president of Somalia, in the spring of 1978.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we aren't just looking at a war. We're tracing, really, the anatomy of a collapse. We're digging into a pile of now declassified State Department cables, CIA intelligence memoranda, and some incredible National Security Council meeting minutes.
All from the Carter administration, covering roughly 77 to 1980.
And our mission here is to connect the dots. We want to see how the Ogaden War between Somalia and Ethiopia wasn't just some border conflict.
It was the first domino. We're going to watch in almost real time through these documents how a military defeat it metastasizes. It turns into economic ruin, then political paranoia, and finally into the complete decay of the Somali state.
It's a perfect case study in that core tension of a dictatorship, isn't it? The leader's survival versus the nation's survival.
And when those two things diverge, things get ugly fast.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's early 1978. Siad Barre has just rolled the dice on what everyone called the Great Gamble.
Right, and to get the gamble, you have to get the dream, Greater Somalia. Barre's whole ideology was built on uniting all ethnic Somalis in the Horn of Africa under one flag. A huge number of them live in Ethiopia's Ogaden region.
Ethiopia in 1977 is in total chaos after its own revolution, so he sees a window.
A perfect window. So he invades, and at first it works incredibly well, but then comes this huge geopolitical pivot, the unholy alliance, as the Somalis called it.
Which is really the Cold War, just turning completely on its head.
Totally. Somalia was a Soviet client state. They had Soviet tanks, Soviet training, the works. But Ethiopia just had a Marxist revolution. So the Kremlin suddenly has two allies fighting each other. They have to pick one.
And they pick Ethiopia.
They pick the bigger prize. And they don't just send support, they airlift in thousands of Cuban troops. They pour in billions in arms. All of a sudden, the Somali army isn't fighting a weak Ethiopian military anymore.
They're fighting a superpower's logistics machine.
Exactly. Which brings us to our first key document. It's a CIA memo from March 6, 1978. The war is basically lost, the Somali army is being crushed, but Siad Barre hasn't ordered a retreat.
Why not?
Well, this memo is fascinating because it's pure psychoanalysis. The CIA analysts say that Barre felt he couldn't voluntarily withdraw. If he orders a retreat to save what's left of his army, he's admitting he failed.
Which is political suicide at home. The whole premise of his rule was this dream.
Precisely. The memo says, and this is a direct quote, he had to be seen to yield only in the face of overwhelming force.
Wait, let's pause on that. He had to let his own army get hammered just to save face.
That's the calculus. He needed the optics of victimhood. He had to be able to go back to his people and say, we didn't lose. The entire world ganged up on us. It's a classic strongman move.
But the price for that move is the military itself.
The price was astronomical. By the time they finally pull out in late March, the army is shattered. They leave their heavy equipment tanks, artillery just rusting in the desert, and that's when the diplomatic scramble starts. Said is desperate. He pivots to the United States.
But the response from the U.S., especially from Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, is, it's pretty cold.
Ice cold. Vance's cables are crystal clear. Get out of Ethiopia, and then maybe we can talk about aid. But as long as one Somali soldier is on their soil, you are completely on your own.
So the army limps home. They've lost the war. They feel betrayed by the Soviets, abandoned by the Americans, and this is the crucial part, betrayed by their own president.
Who fed them into a meat grinder for his own reputation. It creates this incredibly dangerous atmosphere. You have thousands of angry, armed men coming home to a country with a collapsed economy. It's a powder keg.
And the match gets lit on April 9th, 1978. Just weeks after the withdrawal.
The April coup attempt, this is such a pivotal moment in these documents.
What's interesting to me is the geography of it. The intelligence reports say it wasn't a general mutiny. It started in Hargeisa, in the north.
That geography is everything. The plotters were officers who genuinely felt Barre had betrayed the nation. They were furious about the defeat. But because it came from the north, from specific clans, Barre didn't see it as a military problem. He saw it as a tribal one.
And his reaction wasn't exactly subtle.
Far from it. The response was swift and unbelievably brutal. We have reports of mass arrests, summary executions of officers, but the real damage, the thing that echoes for decades, was structural.
Now, so, what do you mean by that?
Well, before this, Barr had tried to style himself as a modern, scientific socialist, above petty clan politics. After April 1978, that mask just comes right off. His circle of trust collapses.
He stops trusting the military as an institution.
Right, so who does he trust?
His own people.
His bloodline. The documents show this very clear shift where he narrows his inner circle down to the Marahan, his own clan. He starts purging officers from other clans, specifically the Isaac in the north and the Majertine in the central regions.
This feels like the exact moment the Somali National Army dies and the president's personal guard is born.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. The army stops being a state protector and becomes a regime protector, and that is a catastrophe. When you start purging your best officers because of their last name, you're not just weakening your army.
You're planting the seeds of civil war. You're telling whole regions of your country, you are the enemy now.
Exactly.
Okay, so internally he's cracking down. But externally, he still has this huge problem. Soviets are gone. He needs a new sponsor. He needs to do the Cold War shuffle.
Right. He kicks out the Soviet advisors and turns to the West, the U.S., and also conservative Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. He needs cash to pay the bills, and he desperately needs guns to replace everything he lost in the Ogaden.
And there's this one character in the files who really stands out, Ambassador Adu, the Somali ambassador in Washington.
Adu is sort of a tragic figure here. The State Department cable suggests he was basically telling Siad Barre what he wanted to hear. He was painting this picture that the U.S. was just ready to welcome Somalia with open arms and, open checkbooks.
He might have even encouraged the initial invasion by hinting the U.S. would back them up.
It's possible. But back in Washington, the reality was totally different. You see this intense debate inside the Carter administration. It's basically a heavyweight fight. Cyrus Vance versus Zbigniew Brzezinski.
The cautious diplomat versus the Cold War hawk.
It's the classic battle for Carter's foreign policy. You've got Vance at the State Department saying, look, this guy is an aggressor. If we give him weapons, he's just going to attack Kenya or invade Ethiopia again. We can't trust him.
And Brzezinski, the national security advisor, is in the other corner.
Brzezinski is obsessed with the Soviet win in Ethiopia. He's seeing Cuban troops in the Horn of Africa, and he is just freaking out. He argues the U.S. has to shore up Somalia, not because they like Barre, but to stop the Soviets from dominating the whole region.
So who wins? Does Somalia get the weapons?
In a way, nobody wins. The West settles on this really awkward compromise. They offer economic aid, but for weapons, they set a very strict condition: defensive arms only. And this is the kicker, only if Somalia publicly renounces its claims on the Ogaden.
Renounce the Ogaden. I mean, to a diplomat in D.C., that sounds reasonable. Just promise you won't invade your neighbor again. But for Siad Barre?
It was impossible. The documents show he was completely trapped. If he publicly gives up the dream of Greater Somalia, he loses what's left of his legitimacy at home. He's already weak. That would be the final nail.
So he's stuck. He can't get heavy weapons from the U.S. He can't go back to the Soviets. He has a restless population and a purged army. What on earth does a desperate dictator do then?
He doubles down on chaos. If he can't use his regular army to invade, he turns to what we call asymmetric warfare. He basically starts a shadow war.
The documents mention the Western Somali Liberation Front, the WSLF.
Yes. By 1979-1980, the CIA reports are noting that even though there's peace, Barre is still secretly funding and arming over 50,000 insurgents in the Ogaden.
50,000. That's not a rebel group. That's a proxy army.
It's a huge proxy army. And the strategy was something analysts called salami slicing.
Salami slicing.
Yeah, where you try to get a big goal through tiny incremental actions, slicing off little pieces of territory, keeping the conflict simmering just below the level of a full-scale war.
But why? What's the point if you can't win?
Because it maintains a state of emergency at home, it rallies what's left of nationalist feeling, and most importantly, it distracts everyone from the fact that the economy is falling off a cliff. Don't look at the food shortages, look at our brave struggle.
Let's talk about those food shortages. Because while Barre is playing these war games, the documents paint an absolute bleak picture of the Somali economy.
Bleak is an understatement. This was the silent killer. The Soviets took their economic aid with them when they left, but the war left Somalia with this massive bill.
And it's not just for lost tanks and bullets.
No, it's for people. One of the most overlooked parts of this is the refugee crisis. Because Barr kept this insurgency going, hundreds of thousands of ethnic Somalis fled the fighting in the Ogaden and poured into Somalia.
So you have a country that's already broke, and suddenly its population explodes with refugees who need food, water, and shelter.
Exactly. It just completely overwhelmed the state. The documents show Barr was relying on handouts of Saudi cash just to keep the lights on. But that's not an economy. That's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
It's like paying your mortgage with a credit card every month.
Right. And meanwhile, the actual productive parts of the economy were being starved to fund the security apparatus, the spies, the secret police, the clan guards.
Which brings us to the really dark period in these files, 1979, 1980. The slide toward collapse. We talked about the 78 coup, but the opposition didn't just vanish.
No, it evolved. And here's a key turning point. We see the rise of the Somali Salvation Front, or SSF. What's so significant isn't just that they existed, but where they were based.
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. I mean, think about the psychological shock of that. For the very first time, an armed Somali opposition group was using Ethiopia, the historic enemy, as a base to launch attacks against the Somali state.
That's a complete reversal of everything. It's like they're saying, we hate Siad Barre more than we hate the Ethiopians.
Exactly. It shows you just how deep the fracture had gone. The national unity Barre always talked about was dead. It was now Somalis fighting Somalis, with foreign powers just watching.
There was a quote in one of the intelligence assessments from this time, late 79, I think, that really, really stuck with me. They actually compare Siad Barre to Hitler.
It is jarring to see that in a classified government file.
Yeah, you expect that on, cable news, not in a CIA memo.
Right. And to be clear, they weren't comparing him in terms of genocide. They were comparing his psychology, the all-or-nothing gamble. The assessment said that, like Hitler, Barre was not moved by any idea of compromise.
That is a damning psychological profile. It's basically saying, this man will burn the entire house down before he ever steps aside.
And it tells you that the U.S. intelligence community knew he wasn't going to reform. He was just going to ride this train all the way to the crash.
And they saw the crash coming, didn't they?
They did. By late 79, early 1980, the assessments start describing his position as gradually weakening, and they identify this trap he built for himself. To survive the growing opposition, he had to increase repression.
But more repression just creates more opposition.
It's a feedback loop of destruction. He cracked down on one clan, which created more enemies, which required even more repression. The sources describe the creation of a police state.
But was it an efficient police state? I always think of police states as being terrifyingly competent.
And that's the irony. The documents show a state that was efficient at control, maybe, but failing completely at governance. The national institutions, the ministries, the courts, they were being hollowed out.
What does hollowed out look like on the ground?
It means the Ministry of Health isn't worried about health. It's worried about which doctors are loyal. The courts aren't about justice. They're about punishing enemies of the state. Everything, every single part of the government was being repurposed for one goal, keeping one man in power.
Competence no longer matters. Only loyalty.
And only loyalty to him and his clan. So by 1980, the state is basically a shell.
It's a shell propped up by fear and foreign cash.
The national army is gone. The economy's on life support. The diplomatic bridges are burned. And it's so tragic because when you lay out the timeline, 1977 invasion, 1978 defeat and coup, 1979 repression, it becomes so clear. The collapse of Somalia didn't just happen in 1991 when the government fell.
No, that's just when the world started paying attention.
That's the real structural verdict of these documents. The collapse was already visible by 1980. The structure was broken. The entire 1980s were just a long, painful delay of the inevitable. The military defeat killed his legitimacy, and refusing to let go of the greater Somalia dream made any kind of recovery impossible.
It just makes you rethink the whole narrative. We see the chaos of the 90s Black Hawk Down, the famine as this sudden explosion. But these documents show the fuse was lit way back in March 1978.
It was. And it raises this really provocative question that you see bubbling up in the NSC assessments. Siad Barre thought he could blackmail the superpowers. He thought his location was so strategic that someone had to save him.
But in the end?
In the end, he just became a liability to everyone. The Soviets dumped him. The Americans kept him at arm's length, giving him just enough aid to prevent mass starvation, but never the weapons he wanted.
So the lesson isn't just about losing a war. It's about what happens when you dismantle your own country to stay in power.
Exactly. When a leader sacrifices the institutions of the state, the army, the economy, the courts, just to save his own skin, is the collapse of that state inevitable? These documents seem to say yes. You can't execute your best officers and expect to have an army. You can't live on handouts and expect to have an economy.
That is a heavy thought to end on. The cost of that kind of nationalism isn't just lost territory. It's the loss of the state itself.
And the real tragedy is that it's always the people who pay the price for the leader's gamble.
We're going to wrap it up there. This has been a deep dive into the papers of the Carter administration and the beginning of the end for Syed Gar's Somalia. It's a lesson in just how fragile a nation can be. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.